King's Bounty. Now there is a name that you would know for one of two reasons. One, you were a big fan of the Heroes of Might and Magic franchise and wanted to see where it all started from. And two, you are from Russia and have played King's Bounty, King's Bounty 2, and I believe there was a King's Bounty 3 as well. Back before the age of proper internet, the dissipation of video games tended to be a bit strange, in the sense that it often had effects which were unpredictable. For example, King's Bounty, yeah, that was an okay game, people in the US played it, but New World Computing's concept of a turn-based strategy game with RPG elements did not really take off until Heroes of Might and Magic 2. In Russia, however, King's Bounty was a big deal. King's Bounty, mostly pirated because, you know, how else would you get games there in 1990? It's not like someone imported them or sold them legally. They would sell them, but not legally. Resonated immensely with that audience. With Russia, with Poland, with, you know, that corner of the world. The more, it is grim, dark and depressing. It is better day of year, you know, your stereotypical area of this part of Europe and Asia. King's Bounty was so big there that they made sequels. And I don't mean that New World Computing made sequels, no, the people in Russia made sequels to King's Bounty. And they called it King's Bounty. For decades, the gaming community there refined the concept and made more games that were like it, but only in gameplay. They switched up everything else. They had their own mythology, they had their own types of creatures, of spells, you know, they made it their own. And in 2008, they would make King's Bounty officially their own. A game developer named Katauri Interactive was working on one of its own similar games, called Battle Lord. It was gonna be another one of these King's Bounty-like games that had nice graphics, good gameplay, and it sort of got the attention of 1C Company, which is one of the biggest publishers in Russia. And it so happens that 1C Company had bought the rights to King's Bounty, and they sort of combined the two ideas of Battle Lord and the name King's Bounty into what we now call King's Bounty The Legend. A game that may be just 8 years old, but it is one of the finest examples of a reinvention of a series, a rebirth. Rising from its ashes, much like the Heroes of Might and Magic franchise never managed to do. Now, I've criticized the new Heroes games for having World of Warcraft style graphics, and yet I very much like King's Bounty and how it looks. You may say I'm a hypocrite, that's okay, have your own opinion, that's an important thing to have, but King's Bounty, while it does have the same kind of cartoonish look to it, it doesn't go as far as World of Warcraft or as far as Heroes of Might and Magic. You don't have necessarily gigantic pauldrons on every character. Vampires don't look like crap. The orcs are a bit more brutish than they are just back from the gym. And it had enemies like dragonflies that harken back to the age where you used to rampage through Might and Magic 6 and 7 and 8, just murder, and 9, just murder, and I believe, no, 10 doesn't matter. Just murdering a bunch of dragonflies constantly. Stylistically, it did, again, look a bit like World of Warcraft in terms of, more like Warcraft 3 in terms of sort of how the buildings look, at least, the castles, but it was its own thing. It was very much its own thing. And also, this is King's Bounty, which had a graphical style established 26 years ago that no one probably remembers, and it also kind of sucked, so they can do whatever they want with it. In terms of music, although it got repetitive, what with each map having one melody, it did have some very beautiful tunes in it. I especially like to remember Under a Shadow of an Oak by Linderebros, which was a fantastic melody. It came as such a soothing song after spending about 30 hours listening to Glory Ride over and over and over again until your ears bled. Not that it was a bad song, but listening to the same thing for 30 hours will cause you to go insane. Speaking of insane, this game may drive you insane. Now, people will like today to say that, well, I like difficult video games, that's why I play Dark Souls, that's why I play Bloodborne, that's why I play, I don't know, Goat Simulator or whatever you want. King's Bounty The Legend In terms of difficulty, how shall I put this? Normal in this game is what in other games would be the second to last difficulty. The harder difficulty. Not hard, harder. Why? Because it did its goddamn darnest to treat you like an absolute and total piece of crap at the beginning, and basically at the beginning of every other map. When you start on this game, you play as a recruit knight. Your canon name is Bill Gilbert, but you can set it whatever you want. And you can be a warrior, a paladin, or a mage. And your job is to go to the king's castle and say, "Yo king, what's up?" And he'll be like, "Yo, some peeps made up with my plugins. Go get me back my plugins." And you wonder, what the hell is a plugin? But that doesn't matter. The basic idea of this game was that you would go around maps, which sort of harken back to Heroes of Might and Magic style maps, with buildings on them, with neutral mobs on them, with treasures on them, but not mines. There were mines, but in the architectural sense, not in the this generates resources sense. And you would fight enemies, you would complete quests, you would gather loot, you would gather experience and gold and plugins and runes for your skills, and eventually you would become a big badass that would have to fight bigger badasses. There was also a story, like an actual story to it. King's Bounty, the first one, had a sketch of a story, and I believe that the Neural Computing, or at least 3DO, actually made a remake of it for the Game Boy, which also had kind of the same sketch of a story, not actually a story, but this one actually had dialogue, it had characters, and it had something that came a bit out of left field. It had wit, like W-I-T. The writing was actually funny. It was a bit self-aware of what it was and what your character had to do, and it led to some interesting situations, like for example, a abbot from the monastery where you start off will give you a sack of coins for you to take to another monastery in the swamps, and you could look in that sack, fish around for gold if you wanted to. And the text option that let you do that was something like, "You pay close attention to your surroundings to see if your conscience is around." Nope, it's not. Feel free to steal. Or something similar. It's been a few years since I've played that bit of the game. My point is that the game had very good writing. Especially since this is a translation from Russian. It is fantastically done. There is no spoken dialogue in it, no voiceover, so it may not resonate with today's crowd. But back then, man, you would just read everything you could from this game because it was funny. And if you permit a bit of a spoiler, the world was kind of insane. Like, it was kind of off the walls insane. It was, if you're familiar with Discworld, think of that minus the elephants. That's the basis of the idea of this world. And eventually you would even get to talk with that turtle. Even fight on its neck against a big bad foe, which I believe may have been a demon. Yes, a big... No, wait. The demon was there, you would fight him in Demonia, but he wasn't the big bad. That's not important. Again, the story is good, it's funny, it's witty, but the basis of this game was always its gameplay. Its mixture of exploration and combat. Like I said, when you started out in each map, the game would make you feel like an absolute and total little bitch. Every mob around you would just pile drive you into the floor and utterly murder you. You would need good tactics to win. You had to understand what your creatures could do, what your abilities could do, what your spells could do, and you had to do your best to gain them without being, again, absolutely murdered in the process. Because if you did get absolutely murdered in the process and your brand new army, which you spent quite a lot of money on and quite a lot of time collecting, that wasn't replenishable. You were encouraged to keep as many of your units alive as long as possible, because odds are you wouldn't be able to recruit more of them. There were limits, especially on the higher level units. There were limits. They would not just be there waiting for you to buy them from someone. I believe they did regenerate after a while, but it was a long while. You're better off basically trying to not get everyone killed. You would hang on to every last piece of scrap you could, because the game had no mercy. Well, sure, if you lost, you would be reset to the beginning with your progress intact and some gold to help you out, but your army was dead. So how could you avoid being a total and absolute little bitch? Well, you were one. You would sneak around the mobs. Unlike heroes, traveling in the overworld on the map was not a turn-based affair. The combat was. The combat was superb. It was as good as Heroes of Might and Magic ever was. But on the overworld, everybody moved at their own time, and all the mobs mostly hated you. So when they saw you, they would chase you. And thing is, you were on a horse, so odds are you could outrun them. So if you saw a guard on a treasure, on an item, on an artifact, you could draw them to you, run away, and go around their backs and pick up that treasure. And basically that's how you got around the first parts of most of the maps, because you were horribly underpowered. And with those bonuses, you maybe had a chance to fight them on equal footing. Now, the reason why the game was so difficult is that you had to collect 3 different types of runes to get your skills. Skills that affected your statistics in the same way that you had in Heroes. You had attack, you had defense. Those affected your creatures as well. It affected what spells you could cast. It affected what other types of abilities you could unlock for your creatures, like an extra type of attack. And you also had something called a rage box. Now, this was a plot item, meaning that you got it if you progressed far enough into the plot, and it was basically a box of ravenous demonic spirits, well, not all of them, but some of them, that you could summon if you were angry enough. Basically, if you killed or were beaten enough, you would fill a meter and you could call one of these creatures. It was like a limit break thing. And the more you used them, the more these creatures progressed, they became stronger, they got better attacks, and you could talk to them, and they were funny, which is a very important characteristic of the game. Your character could also marry someone. You could marry a frog princess, you could have children with her, and you could actually turn her back into a frog if you wanted to, which was kind of mean, but you could. There were multiple possible wives in the game you could get. Each of them had different statistics, different bonuses, and could hold different items for you because you had a limited inventory. You could also divorce them if you wanted to, or, you know, have kids, and each kid would be a predefined bonus that you would get. Also, if you did divorce and you had kids, she would take most of your money and all the items she had equipped, but that's not important. Another reason that the game was difficult was the way it handled the limit of the number of units you could carry in battle. There was such a thing as a leadership cap, meaning that even though you had access to all the units you wanted and you had all the money you needed, you could not command them all in battle. You could command out of each type a certain number of them based on the total leadership cost they had. For example, I could command about 30 footmen maybe, and they would be 1 unit. They would occupy 1 slot. In another slot I would have 16 archers, because that's how many archers I could command in total. And I could probably command 1 measly archmage. 1. Just 1. You would get to value such creatures even early on. Like when your archmage got killed because you were in aggressive stance and got a bonus to your attack but a debuff to your defense, you would want to reload the game because, man, I really needed that archmage. Like he had abilities, he had spells, he was so cool. But that would soon pass because there were so many other cool units in the game. Units that had upgraded versions. Oh, you also had items. Items which had upgraded versions. And you wouldn't just upgrade them by constantly using them. You would also have to go into the items themselves because they tended to be possessed by evil, powerful entities and beat them into submission until they said, okay boss, I'm with you. I'm unlocking the next level of power. Okay, don't beat me anymore. And that's how you would progress through pretty much anything. You had to fight tooth and nail for everything. And yet, I mean, despite the fact that going from one map to another tended to be a bit slow, and there was no combat speed setting, and you couldn't fully rotate the camera in combat, but that's not that important. King's Bounty: The Legend did not feel like a depressing sludge to drudge through. It didn't feel slow and absolutely lacking any sort of joy, any sort of reward in the process of progressing. The world managed to compensate for a lot of that grindy feeling to it. It was so charming, so inviting for you to explore. There were hidden treasures, there were so many things you could find. There was even a reference, like a direct reference to the Might and Magic universe, which you would find Endemoni, I believe, there was a trader that mentioned that, hey, by the way, I'm a Bintic scene. I don't believe they actually made more of it, of the reference, I mean, because they don't own Might and Magic. It's currently owned by Ubisoft. Oh, one more thing you had to collect. Magic crystals, so you could inscribe scrolls you found as spells into your books. You wouldn't have to just use the scrolls over and over again until they got depleted. So this thing probably had more resources in it that you had to manage than Heroes of Might and Magic 6, where you had to build cities. Here you don't build cities, you're just in an RPG with a combat mode that is basically Heroes of Might and Magic, or King's Bounty, because King's Bounty, the original, had the same combat. It was a fantastically charming game to play, and it spawned a lot of sequels. The best one, I would say, is King's Bounty, the Armor Princess Crossworlds, which is the Armor Princess, the sequel, with the Crossworlds expansion. That expansion, I actually had to replay Armored Princess to get to the content in it, which was kind of depressing because I spent about 60 hours in Armored Princess, and then another about 10-20 hours to get to the content in Crossworlds, which in itself was not all that important in the grand scheme of things, but it does make the entire experience of playing Armored Princess a lot better. If you're wondering why it's called Armored Princess, it's because you play as a princess in an armor. Well, it's debatable how armored she is because the mage class is a bit skimpy on the clothes. If you're gonna play the series, I recommend probably Crossworlds, because Amelia, the Armored Princess, has a Pegasus that can fly around the map after a certain while, so you're not gonna have to just go through each bit of the map to get from one place to another. You can fly over it, and it does have a few other refinements that make it quite nice to play. It doesn't have a rage box, but instead you have a dragon. Then there came Warriors of the North, which I didn't play as much. It was about at this time that the engine, the formula, started a bit to show its age. They didn't sort of refine it that much anymore. You'd think in 4 years they could come up with more units, more content, but they sort of didn't. And that sort of holds the same for King's Bounty Dark Side, released just 2 years ago, which is basically the same thing with not a lot of improvements. Though to be fair, only the Legend and King's Bounty Armor Princess with Crossworlds were made by Kategory Interactive. The rest were made by, well, 1C Company's sort of shovelware division. So with the winter holidays approaching, if you want to play something that will beat you senselessly into submission, yeah, try King's Bounty, The Legend, and Crossworlds. They're fun games, though a bit of masochism also helps. Thank you for watching this show. If you enjoyed it, please consider watching some of our other videos and maybe sharing them or giving a thumbs up if you feel like it. And if you really liked what you saw, please check out our Patreon page. For just $1 a month, you could help us make much better shows and get some rewards in the process. Or you could consider buying my book called Tale of Doom. Volume 1 is out now and available for just $2. And as always, if you thought it was horrible, you know where to find me and complain about it.